Imagine walking alone through a dark London street. The air is cold. The gas lamps flicker, casting long, dancing shadows. Footsteps echo behind you, then suddenly stop. You hold your breath, heart pounding in your chest. By morning, another woman is found dead. No witnesses, no suspect, only fear. In 1888, London met a killer so elusive that over a century later, the world still whispers his name. They called him Jack the Ripper. To understand this story, we have to go back to Victorian London, a city of incredible contrasts. On one side, you had immense wealth, grand houses, and elegant society. But just a few streets away, it was a completely different world. In the East End district of Whitechapel, life was a daily struggle. The streets were overcrowded, sanitation was poor, and crime was rampant. For many women, survival was a desperate game, and some were forced into prostitution just to afford a meal or a bed for the night. And it was here, in the darkest corners of Whitechapel, that a new kind of terror began to unfold. On August 31, 1888, just before dawn, the body of a woman named Maria Nichols was discovered in a narrow, dimly lit street. At first, the police treated it as just another tragic, but unfortunately common crime in the area. Whitechapel had seen its share of violence. But then, just over a week later, it happened again. The body of Annie Chapman was found, and then another, and another. A horrifying pattern started to emerge. Women were being murdered late at night, or in the very early hours of the morning, always in dark, deserted public places. The killer struck with terrifying speed and then vanished into the labyrinthine streets without leaving a single trace. Fear spread through the city like a plague. The women of Whitechapel were terrified. They stopped walking alone, even on familiar routes. Residents began locking their doors and barricading their windows. The London newspapers, always hungry for a sensational story, exploded with screaming headlines, each one more frightening than the last. Everyone could feel it. Something was different about these murders. Something was deeply, chillingly deliberate. Then, the letters started arriving. The police were flooded with hundreds of them, most claiming to be from the killer. The vast majority were quickly dismissed as cruel hoaxes from people seeking attention. But one letter, received by the Central News Agency, stood out. It was written in red ink, filled with a chilling, mocking confidence. The author taunted the police, claimed responsibility for the murders, and promised that his work was far from over. And at the bottom, it was signed with a name that would become infamous, a name the world would never forget: Jack the Ripper. To this day, historians and criminologists debate whether this letter was genuinely from the killer, or just another elaborate prank that happened to stick. But one thing is certain from that moment on: the killer had a name. And for the people of London, fear now had a face, even if it was one they couldn't see. With the Jack the Ripper name plastered across every newspaper, Whitechapel descended into a state of near chaos. The public's fear turned to anger and frustration. Citizens, feeling unprotected, formed their own vigilante groups, patrolling the streets at night, armed with clubs and anything they could find. The police, under immense pressure, doubled their patrols. Investigators worked around the clock, chasing down every lead, no matter how flimsy. Dozens of suspects were questioned, arrested, and then, one by one, released due to lack of evidence. The killer, meanwhile, seemed to be watching, enjoying the pandemonium he had created. And he kept killing. The murders became more brutal, more daring. On the night of September 30th, the killer achieved a new level of audacity in what later became known as the double event. Two women, Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes, were murdered within hours of each other, in different locations. The killer was getting faster, bolder. It was almost as if he was playing a twisted game with the authorities, and the police were losing badly. Who could be capable of such monstrous acts? The theories were as numerous as they were wild. Over the decades, countless suspects have been proposed. Was he a doctor or a surgeon whose knowledge of anatomy could explain the horrific precision of the attacks? Was he a local butcher, familiar with the use of knives? Some theories even pointed to a member of the royal family, or a famous artist or writer. The speculation ran wild. Some believed Jack must have been a highly educated gentleman, moving through the city undetected. Others argued he was an ordinary local man, hiding in plain sight among the very people he terrorized. And that was what terrified people the most. It wasn't just the killings themselves, it was the unbearable thought that Jack the Ripper could be anyone. Your neighbor, the man you passed on the street. Someone who could commit an atrocity and then simply melt back into the crowd, completely invisible. Then, in November 1888, the body of Mary Jane Kelly was discovered. The scene was the most gruesome yet. And after that, silence, the murder stopped. The taunting letters ceased. Jack the Ripper had vanished as mysteriously as he had appeared. There was no arrest, no confession, no justice for the victims. There were only questions, a deep, unsettling silence, and a city left scarred by fear. So why was he never caught? We have to remember the time. In 1888, forensic science was in its infancy. The concept of fingerprinting was new and not yet used in investigations. There was no DNA analysis, no sophisticated crime scene investigation, no surveillance cameras. London was a massive, sprawling city, and Whitechapel was a crowded, chaotic warren of streets and alleyways, providing the perfect cover for a killer to disappear. The police force, though trying their best, was simply overwhelmed and outmatched. Jack the Ripper didn't just escape the law, he slipped through the cracks of history itself, becoming a permanent fixture in our collective nightmares. More than 100 years later, the case of Jack the Ripper remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of all time. He is a killer without a face, a name without a true identity, a shadow that still haunts the foggy streets of London in our imagination. The files remain open, the theories continue to evolve, and the public remains fascinated by this ghost from the past. And perhaps the most chilling question of all still hangs in the air. What if Jack the Ripper was never caught, simply because he was never even a suspect? Thank you for watching. If you're fascinated by historical mysteries like this one, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories from the darkest corners of history. See you next time.